Welcome to another episode of Raven Tales of Terror. I'm your host, Ravian Wolfsbane, and today we're delving into the unsettling and mysterious case of Rodney Alcala. Before we begin, I want to issue a content warning for today's episode as we will explore sensitive and graphic details about his crime, so viewer discretion is advised. Rodney James Alcala was born on August 23rd of 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. He was the only boy out of 3 children. When Rodney was young, his family moved to Mexico, and it was alleged that Alcala's father, Manuel Alcala, was an alcoholic who frequently abused his wife, Rodney's mother. After his father's abandonment when Rodney was a teenager, his mother and his sisters all moved to Los Angeles. This toxic environment likely had a significant impact on Rodney's upbringing. His parents divorced when he was young and his mother remarried, but the family moved frequently due to his stepfather's job. Rodney was an intelligent child and excelled in school, particularly in mathematics. He was known to have a charming personality, and as he got older, it was noted by his peers that he had good looks. In 1960, Rodney would enlist in the military to become a paratrooper, but only served as a clerk. He was stationed at Fort Campbell, and it was noted by a commanding officer that he was manipulative and insubordinate. He was disciplined on several occasions for assaulting young women. In June of 1963, it was said that he had a nervous breakdown leading to him going AWOL. He was approved to go to Nashville, but instead he stole a car and a credit card and went to New York. A military report stated that he was leaving a bar and he saw a woman and followed her down the street. He then struck her with a glass Coke bottle, but the woman ended up fleeing and reported him to the proper authorities. He was in Myrtle Beach when he was charged by the military police for his absence, though he ended up escaping while he was being taken back to the fort while switching trains at a station. He eventually managed to make it back to California, where his mothers and sisters resided at the time. His family said that they noticed his behavior was very unusual, and he exposed himself to his younger sister, and it is said that she became hysterical. The military apprehended him again, and he pled guilty to his charges. He had a psychiatric evaluation and was fined after he was convicted. He was honorably discharged from the military, and his actions were said to be due to the nervous breakdown. In 1968, Rodney enrolled in UCLA and majored in photography. He was once again known for his charming and charismatic personality. He was popular on campus and he had many friends. In September of this year, Rodney saw an 8-year-old girl walking to school while he was driving. He offered her a ride and the girl refused, but Alcala persisted and convinced the girl that he knew her parents. She relented and got into his car. A witness saw this and followed Rodney, driving behind him back to Alcala's apartment. The witness watched them go into Rodney's apartment and called the police. The police went into his apartment and heard a struggle while they knocked on Rodney's door. The officer forced their way into the apartment after seeing Rodney undressed in the window. Alcala was running to the back door and the girl was found bleeding on the ground. There was a metal bar on her neck pinning her to the ground. The girl amazingly survived the incident after months in the hospital. The police used identification found in Rodney's apartment to identify him and found photographs of other children. Rodney eventually ran to New York and enrolled into a school to study film. He went by the name of John Berger. After leaving New York, Rodney worked as a camp counselor in New Hampshire. While Rodney was working as a camp counselor, 2 of the campers were walking down to the post office and saw a poster of the FBI's most wanted list. The campers recognized Rodney as the man that they knew as John Berger. After making their way back to the camp, the kids reported this to the people in charge. These people also agreed that John was in fact Rodney. The New Hampshire FBI apprehended Rodney shortly after. Rodney attempted to flee but was again captured. The victim of Rodney's previous heinous crime had moved back to Mexico, and when the family was asked if she would testify, they had refused. Due to this, Rodney was not able to be charged for the serious crime that took place and instead got a plea deal. He was merely charged with child molestation. Rodney would only spend 34 months in prison, and after his release, he was sentenced to another 2.5-year prison sentence for smoking marijuana with an underage girl. This early exposure to the criminal justice system would later play a significant role in his life, leading him down a darker path as a serial killer. Rodney's parole officer allowed him to go to New York on a trip. He would ask strangers to take their pictures, and one was of a woman who was a well-known club owner's daughter, and she was later reported missing. On her calendar on the day she went missing was the name John Berger. Due to the previous case, the FBI recognized Alcala's alias. They were unable to arrest him due to a lack of evidence. The woman's remains were later found in a state park, but at this time, Rodney had already gone back to California. In the early 1970s, Alcala's killing spree began. Rodney would continue his MO of asking strangers to take their pictures. 4 of these women that he had asked to take their pictures would go missing, and their remains would eventually be found. Their bodies would have evidence of severe physical and sexual assault. Around this time, there was a famous TV show called The Dating Game. There were 3 male contestants who would compete for a blind date with a woman. On stage, there would be a partition between the woman and the 3 men, so the bachelorette could ask her questions and the men would give their answer. At the end, the bachelorette would choose which man won the date based on their responses. Often the questions and answers would have sexual undertones. Rodney Alcala would compete September 13th of 1978. It was said on the show that Rodney was a successful photographer. Rodney's last known victim was only 2 months before his appearance on the show. Alcala won the date on the show, however, the bachelorette felt something was very off and didn't go on the date with him. One of Alcala's most infamous crimes was the murder of a 12-year-old in 1979. After he was walking around asking to take strangers' photos and even offering marijuana to multiple minors, he came across 2 young girls. He asked the 2 girls if he could take their photo to submit for a swimsuit contest, and the girls agreed. A witness came up to Rodney and he ran off. They reported this to the police, and the girls gave their statements on the report. One of the 12-year-old girls left on her friend's bike to her dance class later that day. The girl disappeared and was reported as missing. Her shoes and what was left of her body were later found in the mountains near Los Angeles. They used the police report from earlier that day to call on the friend that was with her, and a sketch of Rodney was produced. His apartment was searched, and it was discovered that he had a storage locker in Seattle, Washington. In the storage locker, photos depicting sexual violence of women and a beaded pouch with a pair of earrings inside of it were found. The victim's mother was asked if she recognized the pouch or the earrings, and the earrings were identified to belonging to the victim, and she wore them on the day that she had been reported missing and disappeared. Due to these statements and the evidence, Alcala was able to get charged with the girl's murder. Rodney Alcala's 30-year murder trial was highly publicized and notorious due to the heinous nature of his crimes and the circumstances surrounding them. Alcala, a convicted rapist and serial killer, was charged with multiple counts of murder in California in the 1970s. The trial for his most infamous crimes took place in 2010. During the trial, evidence extracted from his storage locker and eyewitness testimony was presented, linking Alcala to the murders of several young women and a 12-year-old girl. Alcala was convicted and sentenced to death on all counts. Alcala's defense argued that the jury prosecuted him based on his previous convictions instead of the evidence of the current trial, and there was a retrial with a new prosecutor in 1968. Rodney was again convicted and sentenced to death. There would be another retrial as Rodney's lawyers argued his previous lawyers were unable to put together a good case to defend him. His third trial took place in 2010 and he represented himself. He attempted to argue his alibi for the last murder. However, this conflicted with eyewitness testimony that placed him at the beach that day. Alcala cross-examined witnesses, including the mother of one of his victims. He even played segments of his appearance on the television show The Dating Game as part of his defense. Forensic evidence was also presented by the prosecution for the first time due to the advancement in forensic science. They had the earrings of his last victims DNA tested, and not only was the 12-year-old girl's DNA found on the earrings, but also 4 other victims' DNA was found. The trial was then marked with the chilling testimony from a survivor of Alcalas, the little girl who was raped and savagely beaten by Alcala, who previously couldn't stand trial. Despite his attempts to defend himself, Alcala was found guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death for a third and final time. Alcala was later linked to the murder in New York as well as the murder of an airline stewardess later in 2013. Alcala's trial shed light on the horrific nature of serial killers and the devastating impact their actions have on victims and their families. It also highlighted flaws in the criminal justice system, as Alcala's history of violent crimes had allowed him to evade justice for many years before finally being brought to trial. Rodney Alcala died alone in his cell on July 24th of 2021. At the age of 77 while incarcerated at the Corcoran State Prison in California. The cause of death was reported as natural causes. However, given the circumstances surrounding his crimes and the notoriety he gained as a serial killer, some speculated on the authenticity of his reported cause of death. Despite this, official reports still state that he died of natural causes. Psychological experts and criminal profiles have suggested several possible reasons for Rodney Alcala's murders, based on his behavior and known characteristics, such as narcissism. Alcala exhibited extreme narcissistic tendencies shown through his charm, manipulation, and arrogance. This sense of grandiosity may have fueled his behavior, that he was entitled to control and harm others. Another assumption included sadism. Alcala's brutal and ritualistic killings suggested a sadistic personality, deriving pleasure from inflicting pain on his victims. The control and dominance he exerted over his victims aligned with sadistic traits. Psychopathy was also speculated. Many experts believe Alcala displayed traits of psychopathy characterized by a lack of empathy, remorse, and a disregard for societal norms. His ability to deceive and manipulate others without guilt or remorse is consistent with psychopathic behavior. Some also speculate that Alcala may have experienced childhood trauma or abuse that contributed to his violent tendencies. Traumatic experience in early life can distort one's perception of relationships and lead to maladaptive coping mechanisms such as violence. Alcala's crimes also often involved sexual assault or violence, suggesting a sexual component to his murders. Some experts speculate that his deviant sexual desires and fantasies may have played a significant role in motivating his crimes. It is essential to note that criminal behavior is complex, and understanding the psychological motives behind someone like Rodney Alcala can be very challenging. These speculated reasons are based on observations and analysis done by professionals familiar with criminal psychology and serial offenders. The public's reaction to Rodney Alcala's crime was one of shock, horror, and outrage. As details of his brutal murders and assaults emerged during his trials and subsequent investigations, the public was appalled by the extent of his depravity and the callousness with which he treated his victims. Some specific reasons include fear and unease. People living in these areas where Alcala committed his crimes were understandably fearful and anxious, knowing that a serial killer was on the loose. The idea of a predator like Alcala being able to blend in with society and approach his victims under a guise of a photographer was particularly disturbing. The sheer brutality and sadistic nature of Alcala's crimes ignited feelings of disgust and anger amongst the public. Many were horrified by the details of his murders, including how he often posed and photographed his victims before killing them. There was a strong sense of empathy and sympathy for Alcala's victims and their families. The tragic loss of these young women, whose lives were cut short by a ruthless killer, deeply affected the public and fueled a desire for justice. Some members of the public also expressed frustration and distrust towards the legal system for not apprehending Alcala sooner or for allowing him to evade justice for so long. The fact that he had been convicted and sentenced to death multiple times only to have his convictions overturned added to the sense of outrage. Overall, the public's reaction to Rodney Alcala's crimes was one of shock, revulsion, and a strong desire to see him held accountable for his heinous acts. His case remains a chilling reminder of the capacity for evil that exists in the world and the importance of vigilance in identifying and stopping dangerous individuals before they can cause further harm. The case of Rodney Alcala had a significant impact on the public justice system in several ways, such as awareness and attention to serial killers. Alcala's case brought attention to the existence of serial killers and the need for law enforcement agencies to be vigilant in investigating and apprehending these dangerous individuals. It highlighted the importance of collaboration and information sharing among different jurisdictions to track and capture serial offenders. Alcala's case also demonstrated the crucial role of DNA evidence in solving cold cases and linking perpetrators to multiple crimes. His DNA was eventually matched to evidence from crime scenes, leading to his convictions. This highlighted the importance of collecting and preserving DNA samples in criminal investigations. The multiple convictions and appeals in Alcala's case also prompted scrutiny of legal procedures and the appeals process. The delays and challenges in securing convictions against Alcala raised questions about the effectiveness and efficiency of the justice system in handling complex cases involving serial offenders. The case of Rodney Alcala also underscored the importance of supporting and advocating for victims of violent crimes. The stories of Alcala's victims and their families highlighted the lasting impacts of his actions and the need for resources and services to help those affected by such tragedies. Alcala's history of criminal behavior and repeated convictions for violent crimes also raised discussions about the sentencing of repeat offenders and ensuring that dangerous individuals do not get released back into society. It also led to a broader conversation about criminal justice reforms to prevent violent offenders from reoffending. Overall, the case of Rodney Alcala had a lasting impact on the public justice system by shedding light on the challenges of investigating and prosecuting serial offenders, the importance of utilizing forensic evidence, and the need for continuous improvements in the legal system to protect the public from dangerous individuals like Alcala. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Raven Tales of Terror podcast. Join us next time as we delve into another dark and twisted story. And until then, stay safe and be wary of the monsters that lurk in the shadows.